You wake up to the sound of a rooster screaming its lungs out at dawn. Your back is killing you because you just spent the night sleeping on a sack of straw that's probably older than you are. You reach down to scratch your leg and feel something moving. Congratulations, you've got lice. Again. You stumble out of your one-room cottage into the freezing morning air, and the first thing that hits you is the smell. The overwhelming, inescapable smell of human waste, rotting garbage, and about 300 unwashed people living within a stone's throw of each other. Welcome to the Middle Ages, and you're stuck here. Today, we're diving into why being born in medieval times was basically losing the lottery of human existence. We're talking about 1,000 years of history where life was, to put it mildly, absolutely terrible for most people. And I'm not just talking about the lack of Wi-Fi or indoor plumbing, though those are pretty important. I'm talking about a world where a simple cut could kill you, where your life expectancy was maybe 35 if you were lucky, and where bathing was considered dangerously unhealthy. So buckle up, because we're about to explore every gruesome, disgusting, and horrifying detail of what it was really like to live in medieval Europe. Trust me, by the end of this video, you'll be kissing your smartphone and thanking whatever deity you believe in that you were born in the 21st century. Chapter 1. Your daily reality. Let's start with the basics. You're a peasant. And before you say, wait, what if I'm a noble? Let me stop you right there. 90% of people in medieval Europe were peasants. 90%. So, statistically speaking, you're a peasant. Deal with it. Your entire world consists of about 5 square miles. That's it. That's your universe. Most people in the Middle Ages never traveled more than 15 miles from where they were born. You don't even know what the next village over looks like. The concept of going on vacation doesn't exist. The concept of leaving your village for any reason other than war or starvation barely exists. Your house, if we can even call it that, is a single room made of wattle and daub. That's basically sticks and mud, for those of you who didn't take medieval construction classes. The roof is thatch, which means it's made of dried grass and reeds. It leaks when it rains. It catches fire if someone looks at it wrong. And it's definitely full of rats, mice, and insects that have made themselves very comfortable in your ceiling. The floor? Dirt. Just dirt. Maybe some rushes or straw thrown on top if your family is doing particularly well. You share this space with your entire family and probably a few animals. Yes, animals. Your pig sleeps 3 feet from where you sleep. Your chickens roost in the corner. This isn't because medieval people loved animals so much they wanted to cuddle with them at night. It's because animals are valuable, and if you leave them outside, someone will steal them. Also, they provide heat in the winter, which brings me to my next point. It is always either too hot or too cold. There's no central heating. There's no air conditioning. In the summer, you're sweating buckets in your wool clothing because yes, you wear wool year-round. Cotton isn't really a thing in medieval Europe yet, and linen is expensive. In the winter, you're huddled around a fire pit in the middle of your one-room house, trying not to die of smoke inhalation because chimneys haven't been invented yet. Well, they have been invented, but they're luxury items for rich people. You're not a rich person. The fire is going constantly. You can't let it go out because starting a new fire is actually difficult and time-consuming when you don't have matches or lighters. You have to use a flint and steel, and if you're not good at it, you're going to be sitting in the dark and cold for a very long time. So there's always someone in your family whose job it is to make sure the fire doesn't die. Usually, that's a child. Child labor is not only legal in the Middle Ages, it's expected. Kids start working as soon as they can walk. Part 1. Basic Survival. Chapter 2. Food, always hungry. Now let's talk about food, because you're definitely thinking about food. You're always thinking about food in the Middle Ages, because you're always hungry. Not, I skipped lunch, hungry. I'm talking about, I haven't had a full meal in 3 days, hungry. The the kind of hungry that makes your stomach feel like it's eating itself. Your diet consists primarily of bread, not the nice fluffy bread you buy at the grocery store. I'm talking about dense, dark, heavy bread made from whatever grain your Lord allows you to keep after he takes his cut. And yes, he takes a cut. You don't own the land you farm. You don't own the mill where you grind your grain. You don't own the oven where you bake your bread. Your feudal lord owns all of that, and you have to pay him for the privilege of using it. The bread is full of grit because the millstones shed particles into the flour. This means that by the time you're 30, your teeth are ground down to nubs. Dental care doesn't exist. Toothbrushes don't exist. Toothpaste doesn't exist. Your teeth are probably brown, definitely painful, and falling out one by one. And when they do fall out, they're not growing back. You just have to live with a mouthful of gaps and abscesses. Besides bread, you eat a lot of pottage. What's pottage? It's basically a thick stew made from whatever vegetables you can grow or forage, maybe some grains, and if you're really lucky, a tiny bit of meat. But probably not meat. Meat is for rich people and special occasions. You might get to eat meat a few times a year during religious festivals. The rest of the time you're eating onions, cabbage, turnips, beans, and peas. So, many beans. Your digestive system is a nightmare. Everyone has constant stomach problems because your diet is terrible and food safety isn't a concept that's been invented yet. That meat you did manage to get? It might be rotten. The water you're drinking? It's probably contaminated with all sorts of bacteria and parasites. You have worms. I guarantee it. Everyone has worms in the Middle Ages. It's just a fact of life. Speaking of water, you barely drink it. Water is dangerous because it comes from rivers and wells that are contaminated with sewage, dead animals, and who knows what else. Instead, you drink ale. Yes, ale. All day, every day. Even children drink ale. But don't get excited. Medieval ale isn't like modern beer. It's weak, sour, and tastes like moldy bread water. But it won't kill you as fast as drinking straight water will, so you chug it down. You eat with your hands. Forks haven't been invented yet, or rather, they exist, but they're weird little two-pronged things that rich people use to eat sticky sweets, and they definitely haven't made their way down to the peasant class. You have a knife and a spoon, and that's it. You eat off of a trencher, which is a thick piece of stale bread that serves as both your plate and part of your meal. At the end of dinner, you eat your plate. It's actually kind of genius if you ignore the fact that it's soaked in grease and whatever slop you've been eating. Meals are communal. Everyone shares from the same pot. Personal hygiene isn't a thing, remember? So you're all dipping your dirty, unwashed hands into the same food. It's a miracle anyone survives past childhood, honestly. Oh, and speaking of childhood, let's talk about what it's like to be a kid in the Middle Ages. Actually, let's talk about what it's like to be born, because the first challenge is surviving your own birth. Chapter 3: Birth and Childhood. Surviving the odds. If you're a woman in the Middle Ages, pregnancy is basically a death sentence. Not definitely a death sentence, but your chances of dying in childbirth are somewhere between 1 in 10 and 1 in 3, depending on which historian you ask and what century we're talking about. Those are not good odds. Russian roulette has better odds than that. There are no hospitals. There are no doctors at your bedside. There are no epidurals, no sterile instruments, no antibiotics, no blood transfusions. When you go into labor, a midwife shows up. Maybe she knows what she's doing. Maybe she doesn't. Medieval midwifery is a skill passed down through apprenticeship, and while many midwives are genuinely experienced and helpful, they're working with exactly zero scientific knowledge about how human reproduction actually works. The prevailing medical theory is that women's bodies are basically broken, inferior versions of men's bodies. I'm not making this up. Medieval doctors believed that women were just men who didn't cook properly in the womb. They're working with ancient Greek medical texts that are hundreds of years old and were wrong even when they were written. So you're lying there in agony and the midwife is doing her best, But if something goes wrong, you're probably dead. Breech birth? Dead. Placenta doesn't detach? Dead. Excessive bleeding? Dead. Infection, which is almost guaranteed given that the concept of sterilization doesn't exist? You guessed it. Dead. And if you somehow survive giving birth, congratulations. Now you have to try to keep your baby alive. This is approximately as difficult as it sounds. Infant mortality is catastrophic. Depending on the time period and location, somewhere between 20 and 40% of children die before their first birthday. That's not a typo. Up to 40%. Nearly half of all babies born don't make it to age 1. If they survive the first year, they've got a decent shot at making it to adulthood, but decent is relative. Another 20 to 30% die before age 5. That means that in some places, more than half of all children die before they reach their 5th birthday. More than half. This is why medieval people had so many children. It wasn't because they loved big families or didn't have contraception, though that's also true. It's because they needed to have 6 or 7 kids just to ensure that 2 or 3 would survive to adulthood. What kills all these children? Everything. Malnutrition, diseases, accidents, infections from minor injuries, pneumonia, dysentery, smallpox, measles, and dozens of other illnesses that are easily preventable or treatable today, but are death sentences in the Middle Ages. Oh, and there's also infanticide and abandonment, which happen more often than anyone wants to talk about. If a family can't afford another mouth to feed, sometimes babies just disappear. It's dark, it's horrible, and it's reality. Let's say you beat the odds and survive to childhood. Congratulations! Your reward is a lifetime of backbreaking labor. There's no such thing as childhood as we understand it. There's no time for play, no school for most people, no toys beyond whatever stick or rock you find on the ground. By age 7, you're working in the fields alongside the adults. You're learning your father's trade if you're a boy, or learning to spin, weave, cook, and keep house if you're a girl. There's no such thing as formal education unless you're very, very rich or you're training to be a priest. The vast majority of people are completely illiterate. They can't read. They can't write. They can't do math beyond basic counting. And this isn't because medieval people were stupid. They're just as intelligent as we are. But literacy serves no purpose in their daily lives. You don't need to read to plow a field or milk a cow or mend clothes. Books are rare, expensive, and handwritten by monks in monasteries. The printing press won't be invented until the very end of the Middle Ages. Your education consists of watching your parents work and copying what they do. That's it. You learn by doing, and what you learn is whatever your parents knew, which was whatever their parents knew, which was whatever their parents knew. Innovation is rare because everyone is just trying to survive, and trying something new might mean starvation if it fails. Chapter 4. Disease and Medicine. Death is everywhere. Now let's talk about medicine, or rather, the complete and utter lack of it. If you get sick in the Middle Ages, you are probably going to die. I'm not exaggerating. Modern medicine is the primary reason human life expectancy has more than doubled in the past few centuries. Remove modern medicine from the equation, and suddenly, that cut on your finger can kill you. That cough can turn into pneumonia. That stomach ache might be appendicitis, and if your appendix bursts, you're dead within days. Medieval medicine is based primarily on the theory of the 4 humors. According to this theory, the human body contains 4 fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Disease happens when these humors get out of balance. The cure: rebalance them. How? Usually by bloodletting, which is exactly what it sounds like. They cut you open and drain your blood into a bowl, or they apply leeches to suck your blood out. Yes, leeches. Actual leeches. This is considered cutting-edge medical treatment. The problem is that this doesn't work. Obviously. You're not sick because you have too much blood. You're sick because you have an infection, or a virus, or a bacterial disease, or cancer, or any number of things that have nothing to do with the balance of your bodily fluids. But medieval doctors don't know about bacteria. They don't know about viruses. They don't know about the immune system. Germ theory won't be discovered for another 500 years. So when you show up to the doctor with a fever, he'll likely bleed you, which makes you weaker and more likely to die. Or he'll give you a purgative to make you vomit and defecate, which dehydrates you and makes you weaker and more likely to die. Or he'll prescribe some herbal remedy that at best does nothing and at worst poisons you. Oh, and did I mention that doctors are expensive? Like, really expensive? So expensive that basically no peasant can afford one? If you're a peasant and you get sick, you're not going to a doctor. You're going to the local wise woman who knows some folk remedies passed down through generations. Some of these remedies actually work because they're based on plants that have genuine medicinal properties. Willow bark tea for pain, for example, works because willow bark contains salicylic acid, which is basically aspirin. But a lot of these remedies don't work or actively make things worse. And even if you get lucky and find someone who actually knows what they're doing, they're still limited by medieval medical knowledge, which is barely better than guessing. Surgery exists, but it's horrific. There's no anesthesia beyond alcohol, and maybe some opium if you're lucky and rich. Imagine getting your leg amputated while you're fully conscious, held down by several strong men, while a barber surgeon saws through your bone with a dirty blade. That's surgery in the Middle Ages. Oh, you thought surgeons were doctors? Nope. In the Middle Ages, surgeons are considered lower-class tradesmen, basically on the same level as barbers. In fact, many surgeons are barbers. That's why the barber pole is red and white. The red represents blood. You'd go to get your hair cut and your teeth pulled at the same establishment. They just switch tools. Let's talk about the plague. The Black Death. The big one. In the mid-13th century, the bubonic plague sweeps through Europe and kills somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of the entire population. That's not 1/3 of people who catch it. That's 1/3 of everyone. Period. The total population. Between 75 and 200 million people dead in just a few years. Imagine half of everyone you know dying within a year or two. Your parents, your children, your friends, your neighbors. Half of them. Just gone. Dead in agony. Covered in oozing black boils. Coughing up blood. Delirious with fever. And nobody knows why. Nobody knows what's causing it. Nobody knows how to stop it. The actual cause is bacteria spread by fleas on rats, but medieval people don't know that. They think it's divine punishment for sin. They think it's caused by bad air. They think it's the alignment of the planets. Some people blame the Jews and murder them in pogroms. Some people think it's the end of the world. Some people join flagellant movements and whip themselves bloody in public, hoping to appease God's wrath. The plague comes back, by the way. It's not a one-time thing. There are multiple plague outbreaks throughout the Middle Ages. It becomes a regular feature of life. You just have to hope that when it comes to your village, it doesn't take you. And the plague is just one disease. There's also leprosy, which causes your flesh to rot and fall off while you're still alive. Lepers are cast out of society and forced to live in isolated colonies, ringing bells to warn healthy people to stay away. There's smallpox, which kills millions and leaves survivors horribly scarred. There's tuberculosis, which slowly drowns you in your own blood. There's dysentery, which causes such severe diarrhea that you die of dehydration. There's typhus, typhoid, cholera, and a dozen other diseases that sweep through medieval communities on a regular basis. You know what the life expectancy is in the Middle Ages? About 30 to 35 years. But that's actually misleading because it includes infant mortality. If you make it to adulthood, you might live to 50 or 60. Might. But the key phrase there is, if you make it to adulthood, and we've already established that your chances of doing that are not great. Chapter 5. Hygiene and sanitation, living in filth. Let's talk about hygiene, or as it's known in the Middle Ages, that thing we don't do. You do not bathe regularly. I need you to understand this. You are dirty. You are always dirty. You smell bad. Everyone smells bad. The smell is inescapable. Now, there's a common myth that medieval people never bathed. That's not quite true. They did bathe occasionally. There were public bathhouses in many medieval towns. But occasionally is doing a lot of work in that sentence. We're talking about maybe once a month if you're lucky and live in a town with a bathhouse. If you're a rural peasant, maybe a few times a year. Maybe. And even when people did bathe, they often didn't use soap, or they'd use harsh lye soap that stripped your skin. Shampoo doesn't exist. Deodorant doesn't exist. Perfume exists, but it's expensive and reserved for the wealthy. Your average peasant just smells like sweat, dirt, smoke, and whatever animals they've been working with. Your clothes are filthy. You own maybe 2 sets of clothes, and you wear them until they literally fall apart. You don't wash them often because washing clothes is an enormous amount of work. You have to haul water from the well, heat it over a fire, scrub the clothes by hand with harsh soap, rinse them, and hang them to dry. This takes hours, so you just wear dirty clothes most of the time. Your hair is full of lice. Everyone has lice. Lice are just a normal part of life. You sit around in the evening picking lice out of each other's hair. This is a bonding activity. There are special combs designed specifically for removing lice. You use them every day and you still have lice. Let's talk about the bathroom situation. There is no bathroom. There's no toilet. There's no toilet paper. If you live in a town, you might have access to a public latrine, which is basically a wooden seat with a hole over a pit full of human waste. The smell is indescribable. Flies are everywhere. In the summer, the stench is so bad that people avoid going near the latrines unless absolutely necessary. If you live in the countryside, you just go outside. You find a spot away from the house, you squat, and you do your business. You wipe yourself with leaves, moss, or your hand. Then you go back to your day. You don't wash your hands because running water doesn't exist. There's no sink. At best, you might wipe your hands on your clothes. This means that everything is contaminated with fecal matter. Everything. Your hands, your clothes, your food, your cooking utensils. This is why disease spreads so rapidly. This is why everyone has intestinal parasites. The concept of sanitation doesn't exist. In cities, it's even worse. People throw their chamber pots out of second-story windows onto the street below. Just open the window and toss your night soil right out there. Sometimes they yell, "Gardez-l'eau," as a warning, which is a corruption of the French "Gardez l'eau," meaning, watch out for the water. But often they don't bother, and people walking below just get splattered with human waste. The streets are filled with garbage, human waste, animal waste, blood and guts from butchered animals, and who knows what else. In rainy weather, it turns into a disgusting soup that you have to wade through. In dry weather, it dries into a powder that you breathe in. Either way, you're ingesting or inhaling fecal matter on a regular basis. There are no sewers. Waste just accumulates in the streets until someone decides to shovel it out, which doesn't happen often. Cities smell terrible. There's a reason why plague masks had long beaks stuffed with herbs and flowers. Doctors thought the disease was spread by bad air, so they tried to filter out the smell. They were wrong about the cause, but they were right that cities were disgustingly filthy. Rivers and streams are used for everything: drinking water, washing clothes, disposing of waste, dumping trash, and as sewers for industrial waste from tanneries and dye works. You drink downstream from where people are dumping their sewage. This kills people. A lot of people. Part 2. Violence and Oppression. Chapter 6. Violence and Justice. Brutal punishment. Now let's talk about violence, because the Middle Ages are incredibly violent. I'm not just talking about wars and battles, though there are plenty of those. I'm talking about everyday violence. the kind of violence that's just part of normal life. First, crime. Theft is rampant because everyone is poor and desperate. Banditry is a constant problem, especially on roads between towns. Traveling is dangerous because there are roving gangs of thieves and outlaws who will rob you and possibly kill you just for your clothes and shoes. Forests are particularly dangerous. Many criminals are outlaws hiding in the woods, which is where the legend of Robin Hood comes from. The legal system is, to put it mildly, insane. Trial by ordeal is a thing. If you're accused of a crime and there's no clear evidence, you might be subjected to a trial by ordeal. This can take several forms. Trial by fire involves carrying a red-hot iron bar for a certain distance. If your hand heals within 3 days, you're innocent. If it doesn't, you're guilty. Trial by water involves being thrown into a river while bound. If you sink, you're innocent. If you float, you're guilty and will be executed. Yes, you read that right. If you're innocent, you drown. If you're guilty, you survive the drowning, only to be killed anyway. The logic here is that God will intervene to save the innocent. It's literally a matter of, let's torture this person and see if God performs a miracle. Spoiler alert, God does not perform miracles to save accused thieves. So basically everyone subjected to trial by ordeal either dies during the ordeal or is found guilty and executed. Torture is legal and commonly used. If you're accused of a serious crime, you'll be tortured until you confess. It doesn't matter if you actually did it. You'll confess anyway because the torture is unbearable. The rack, which stretches your body until your joints dislocate. The thumbscrew, which crushes your fingers. The wheel, where your limbs are broken with a hammer and you're left to die slowly. These are all real methods of torture used in the Middle Ages. Executions are public entertainment. When someone is hanged, beheaded, burned at stake, or broken on the wheel, it happens in the town square and everyone comes to watch. It's like going to a movie, except the movie is watching someone die in agony. Children attend. People bring picnic lunches. It's a whole thing. The punishments for crimes are wildly disproportionate to what we'd consider reasonable. Steal a loaf of bread? You might get your hand cut off. Poach a deer from the Lord's forest? Hanged. Murder? Hanged, but after being tortured first. Treason? Hanged, drawn and quartered, which means you're hanged until almost dead, then cut down, disemboweled while still alive, and then cut into pieces. Your body parts are displayed around the city as a warning to others, and that's just the official legal system. There's also a lot of unofficial violence. Domestic violence is common and legal. Husbands can beat their wives. Parents can beat their children. Masters can beat their servants and apprentices. As long as you don't kill them, you're generally fine. Fights break out constantly. People carry knives everywhere because knives are tools you need for eating and work. But knives are also weapons, and arguments frequently escalate to violence. Get into a dispute with your neighbor about where your property line is? Might end up in a knife fight. Someone insults your honor? Knife fight. Someone looks at your wife funny? Knife fight. Dueling is legal and encouraged among the nobility. If someone insults you, you challenge them to a duel. You fight and someone dies or is seriously injured. This is considered a normal and honorable way to settle disputes. The church disapproves, but that doesn't stop anyone. And then there are the wars. So many wars. The 100 Years' War, the Crusades, countless smaller conflicts between kingdoms, duchies, and rival nobles. If you're a peasant, you don't get to avoid these wars. You're conscripted into your lord's army. You're given a spear or a bow and told to go fight. Medieval warfare is brutal. There's no Geneva Convention. There are no rules. Armies pillage the countryside, burning crops, stealing livestock, and murdering civilians. If your village is in the path of an army, even your own army, you're in danger. Soldiers loot, rape, and kill indiscriminately. If you're captured in battle, you might be ransomed if you're a noble. If you're a common soldier, you'll probably be killed, or enslaved, or mutilated, and sent home as a warning to others. Being a prisoner of war is not protected by any laws or conventions. Chapter 7. Social Structure. Trapped forever. Let's talk about the social structure, because if you thought things couldn't get worse, buckle up. You are trapped in a rigid social hierarchy with absolutely no hope of escape. You are born into a social class, and you will die in that social class. Social mobility basically doesn't exist. If your father is a peasant farmer, you will be a peasant farmer. If your mother is a seamstress, you will learn to sew. There's no such thing as following your dreams or bettering yourself. Your life path is determined the moment you're born. The feudal system is based on land ownership, and all land is ultimately owned by the king. The king grants land to nobles in exchange for military service. These nobles grant portions of their land to lesser nobles and knights, who grant even smaller portions to peasants in exchange for labor. You, as a peasant, don't own land. You can't own land. You work someone else's land in exchange for being allowed to live on it and keep a portion of what you produce. But it gets worse. Many peasants are serfs, which is basically slavery with extra steps. As a serf, you're bound to the land. You can't leave. If the land is sold, you're sold with it. You need your lord's permission to get married. You need his permission to leave the manor, even for a day. You owe him labor several days a week, working his fields instead of your own. You owe him a portion of everything you produce. You owe him fees for using his mill, his oven, his wine press, his everything. Your lord has legal jurisdiction over you. He runs his own court and serves as judge in disputes. If you have a conflict with another serf, your lord decides who's right. If you have a conflict with your lord, well, your lord is the judge, so guess who's going to win that case? Your lord can beat you. He can fine you. He can throw you in his private dungeon. There's very little you can do about it. Technically, you can appeal to the king or a higher noble, but good luck actually getting an audience with someone that powerful when you're an illiterate peasant who's never traveled more than 10 miles from home. Women have it even worse. Women are considered property. First, you're your father's property. Then, when you get married, you become your husband's property. You have essentially no legal rights. You can't own property in your own name in most cases. You can't enter into contracts. You can't sue anyone in court. If your husband beats you, that's legal. If he rapes you, that's not even recognized as a crime because you're his wife. Your father chooses who you marry. You don't get a say. Love marriages exist, but they're rare, especially among the lower classes where marriage is more of an economic arrangement. You're married off to whoever provides the best economic benefit to your family. You might be 12 years old. Your husband might be 50. Too bad. Once you're married, your primary job is to produce children, preferably sons. If you can't have children, your husband might annul the marriage or just take a mistress. If you commit adultery, you can be executed. If your husband commits adultery, that's just considered normal male behavior. If your husband dies, you might get some control over your life for a while, but probably not. You'll likely be remarried quickly because a widow with land or property is valuable to someone. If you're poor, you're just screwed. Widows are among the most vulnerable people in medieval society. The church controls education, literacy, and ideology. The church tells you that your suffering in this life is good for your soul. They tell you that the social hierarchy is ordained by God. They tell you that questioning your place in the social order is a sin. They tell you that if you just accept your miserable lot in life and don't complain, you'll be rewarded in heaven. This is very convenient for the people at the top of the social hierarchy who live in castles, eat meat every day, wear silk and fur, and never have to work in a field or smell their own sewage. The nobility and clergy represent maybe 5% of the population, but they control all the wealth, all the power, and all the land. And before you think, well, at least the nobles have it good, Let me tell you that being a noble in the Middle Ages is also pretty terrible, just in different ways. You're constantly at risk of being murdered by rivals, you're expected to go to war and possibly die in battle, and you're trapped in the same rigid social system. You have more to lose, which means more people want to take it from you. Chapter 8. The Church. Fear and Control. Speaking of the Church, let's talk about religion, because religion dominates every single aspect of medieval life. The Catholic Church is the most powerful institution in Europe, more powerful than any king or emperor. You don't have a choice about being Christian. Everyone is Christian. If you're not Christian, you're either a Jew living in a restricted ghetto under constant threat of violence, or you're a heretic who will be burned at the stake. The Inquisition is a real thing, and it's exactly as terrifying as you've heard. The Church controls what you can think, what you can say, what you can read, and how you live your life. The Bible exists, but it's in Latin, which you can't read even if you were literate, which you're not. The Church tells you what the Bible says, and you have to believe them because you have no way to verify it yourself. You're required to attend Mass every Sunday. Missing Mass is a sin. The Mass is conducted entirely in Latin, which, again, you don't understand. You stand there for hours, listening to a priest drone on in a foreign language, not comprehending a single word. But you have to attend, because if you don't, you'll be punished by the Church, which can excommunicate you. Excommunication means you're cut off from the Church and all its sacraments, which means according to Church doctrine, you'll go to hell when you die. It also means you're a social outcast and everyone will shun you. The Church collects taxes called tithes. You're required to give 10% of your income to the Church. 10%. You're already giving a huge portion of what you produce to your feudal lord, and now the Church wants another 10%. You have no choice. If you don't pay, you're committing a sin. The Church tells you that nearly everything enjoyable is a sin. Sex outside of marriage? Sin. Sex inside marriage for any reason other than procreation? Sin. Enjoying sex? Definitely a sin. Eating too much? Gluttony, one of the 7 deadly sins. Wanting nice things? Greed, another deadly sin. Being proud of yourself? Pride, the worst sin of all. You're supposed to confess your sins to a priest regularly. The priest then tells you to do some form of penance, like saying a certain number of prayers, or fasting, or giving money to the Church. If you die with unconfessed sins, you go to hell forever. The Church has incredible psychological control over people because they genuinely believe that their eternal soul is at stake. And then there are the Crusades. The Church declares holy wars against Muslims in the Holy Land, and thousands of Europeans march off to fight and die in the desert. The Pope promises that if you die on crusade, all your sins are forgiven and you go straight to heaven. This is a very appealing offer when your life is terrible and you've been taught to fear hell. But the Crusades aren't just fought in the Holy Land. There are also crusades against heretics in Europe, against pagans in Northern Europe, and basically against anyone the Pope decides is an enemy of the Church. The Church has its own armies, its own courts, and its own prisons. It's a state within a state, and it answers to no one except the Pope. The Church is also phenomenally corrupt. Priests and monks are supposed to be celibate, but many have mistresses or visit prostitutes. Some have entire secret families. Bishops and abbots live like princes, with luxury and wealth while preaching about the virtues of poverty. The Church sells indulgences, which are literally get-out-of-hell-free cards. You pay money, and the Church reduces your time in purgatory. The more you pay, the less time you suffer. It's literally pay to win for the afterlife. Superstition is everywhere because people don't understand how the world works. Bad things happen randomly, and people need explanations. Someone gets sick? It must be witchcraft. The crops fail? God is punishing the village for someone's sin. A comet appears in the sky? It's an omen of disaster. People carry religious relics and charms to protect themselves from evil. They believe in demons, angels, saints, and miracles. Speaking of relics, the medieval relic trade is absolutely insane. Churches claim to have pieces of the true cross, thorns from Jesus' crown, bones of saints, the Virgin Mary's breast milk preserved in vials, Jesus' foreskin. Multiple churches claim to have this, by the way, and all sorts of other supposedly sacred objects. People make pilgrimages to see these relics, believing they have healing powers. The church makes enormous amounts of money from pilgrims. Most of these relics are fake, obviously. There are enough pieces of the true cross scattered around Europe to build several crosses, but people believe because they want to believe, because they need something to hope for in their miserable lives. Part 3. Daily Grind. Chapter 9. Work and Labor, No Rest. Now let's talk about work, because your entire life is work. From the moment you wake up to the moment you collapse from exhaustion, you're working. If you're a peasant farmer, which you almost certainly are, your work is seasonal. In the spring, you're plowing fields behind an ox, which is backbreaking labor. Medieval plows are heavy and inefficient. The soil is often hard and rocky. You're working from dawn until dusk, every day, walking miles behind the plow. Then you're planting seeds by hand, bending over thousands of times, your back screaming in agony. Then you're weeding the fields, which means more bending, more walking, more hours in the sun or rain. Medieval people don't have weekends off. You work every day except Sundays and major religious holidays, and even then, you're still doing necessary chores like feeding animals. Summer is slightly less intense, but you're still maintaining the crops, repairing tools and buildings, cutting hay for the animals, and doing dozens of other tasks. And you're doing all of this in wool clothing, remember, under the hot sun. Heat exhaustion is a real risk. Fall is harvest time, which is the most intense period of work all year. The entire community is in the fields from before sunrise to after sunset, cutting grain with sickles, gathering it into bundles, threshing it to separate the grain from the chaff, and getting it stored before the weather turns. If you don't get the harvest in, you starve over the winter. Period. So everyone works until they physically can't anymore. Winter is slightly easier in terms of farm work, but now you're dealing with the cold and you're doing all the indoor tasks that were neglected during the busy seasons. Repairing tools, processing the flax you grew into linen thread, spinning wool, weaving cloth, making and repairing clothes, and so on. Women's work is never ending. If you're a woman, you're cooking, cleaning, fetching water, making clothes, taking care of children, tending the garden, processing food for storage, making butter and cheese, brewing ale, and probably also helping in the fields during busy times. You never stop. There are no labor-saving devices. Everything is done by hand and takes forever. Making a shirt from scratch takes weeks. You have to process the raw wool or flax, spin it into thread, weave the thread into cloth, cut the cloth, and sew it by hand. Every stitch is done by hand. No sewing machines. One garment represents dozens of hours of labor. Cooking takes hours every day. You can't turn on a stove. You have to maintain a fire, which means gathering wood, which means someone has to go out and collect fallen branches or cut wood. Then you have to tend the fire constantly while cooking. You can't just set a timer and walk away. Food burns easily. Plus, everything is cooked in the same pot because you only have one pot. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner all taste vaguely the same because it's all cooked in the same pot that never gets fully cleaned. Fetching water means walking to the well, drawing water up by hand using a rope and bucket, and carrying heavy buckets back to your house. You need water for cooking, drinking, washing, on the rare occasions you wash things, and for the animals. This is usually a woman's or child's job, and it takes multiple trips every single day. If you're a craftsman instead of a farmer, your life is slightly different but not necessarily better. You're a blacksmith, a cooper, barrel maker, a wheelwright, a tanner, a weaver, a carpenter, or one of dozens of other trades. You learned this trade through apprenticeship, which means you started when you were a child, worked for years for little or no pay as an apprentice, then became a journeyman, and eventually Maybe became a master craftsman with your own shop. The apprenticeship system is brutal. You're essentially an indentured servant. You live with your master, work for him, and he provides food and shelter and training. But he can also beat you if you make mistakes or are too slow. You have no rights. You can't leave until your apprenticeship is complete, which might take 7 years or more. Even if you become a master craftsman, you're still working incredibly long hours. You work 6 days a week, all day, in a shop that's probably attached to your house. You're breathing in harmful fumes if you're a smith or a tanner. You're straining your eyes if you're doing detailed work like jewelry or illuminating manuscripts. You're probably developing repetitive stress injuries from doing the same motions thousands of times. And you're still not making much money. The guild system controls your trade. The guild sets prices, controls who can practice the trade, and limits competition. You can't just decide to charge more for your work. The guild won't allow it. You can't innovate too much or produce goods too efficiently because the guild wants to ensure there's enough work for all its members. Unemployment isn't an option. There's no social safety net. If you can't work, you starve. If you're injured and can't perform your trade anymore, you become a beggar. That's it. That's your retirement plan. Become a beggar and hope people give you enough scraps to survive. Child labor is universal. As soon as a child can perform simple tasks, they're working. 5-year-olds are watching younger siblings, feeding chickens, gathering eggs, and helping with simple chores. By 7 or 8, they're doing real labor. By their teens, they're doing adult work. There's no childhood as we understand it. You're a small adult from a very young age. This is necessary because everyone's labor is needed for the family to survive. Every mouth to feed needs to contribute. There's no such thing as letting kids just be kids. Life is too precarious for that. Chapter 10. Entertainment. What fun! You might be wondering, what about entertainment? What do people do for fun in the Middle Ages? The answer is, not much. Your opportunities for entertainment are extremely limited. You can't read books because you're illiterate and books barely exist anyway. You can't watch TV or movies or play video games because, obviously, those haven't been invented yet. You can listen to traveling minstrels if they happen to pass through your village, which might happen a few times a year. These are wandering musicians and storytellers who perform songs and recite epic poems. This is your only exposure to news from other parts of the country and to professional entertainment. When a minstrel shows up, it's a big event. Everyone gathers to listen. You can go to church festivals and feast days. The church calendar is full of saints' days and religious festivals. These are basically your only days off, and the church provides entertainment during these festivals. Mystery plays, which are religious dramas performed by local people, are popular. They depict Bible stories and are conducted in the town square. Again, everyone attends because there's literally nothing else to do. Larger towns might have annual fairs where merchants come from other regions to sell goods. These fairs also include entertainment like jugglers, acrobats, and performing animals. If you live near a town that hosts a fair, you might be able to attend once a year. This is the highlight of your entire year. The nobility have tournaments, which are basically sporting events where knights compete in jousting, sword fighting, and other martial contests. These are spectacular, violent, and often deadly. Knights get seriously injured or killed in tournaments regularly. If you're a peasant, you might be able to watch from a distance, but you're not participating. These events are for the nobility. On a day-to-day basis, your entertainment consists of gossip, crude jokes, drinking ale, and maybe playing simple games. Dice games are popular, though gambling is technically a sin. Simple ball games exist. Children play tag and other running games. In the evenings, after work, people might gather and tell stories. Oral storytelling is a major form of entertainment. Folktales, legends, and local gossip are shared. This is how news spreads and how culture is transmitted in a largely illiterate society. Music exists, but instruments are expensive. If your village has someone who owns a flute or a drum, you're lucky. People sing while they work and during gatherings. Folk songs are passed down through generations. Dancing is popular during festivals. Folk dancing is a communal activity that everyone can participate in. It's free, it's fun, and it's one of the few pleasures available to ordinary people. Sexual activity is one of the few entertainments that's free and accessible, which is probably why people have so many children despite the high mortality rate. Of course, the church says sex is sinful unless you're trying to make a baby, so you're supposed to feel guilty about enjoying it. Alcohol is extremely important as a form of entertainment and escape. People drink a lot. Ale is consumed constantly, and on festival days, people drink until they're drunk. Getting drunk is one of the few ways to temporarily forget how terrible your life is. Public drunkenness is common and largely tolerated, though the church disapproves. That's basically it for entertainment. Your life is work, church, and trying not to die. Fun is scarce. Leisure time barely exists. You're too tired and too hungry most of the time to do much beyond collapse and sleep. Chapter 11. Education and Knowledge. Ignorance rules. Let's circle back to education and knowledge because the level of ignorance in the Middle Ages is staggering. As we've established, most people can't read or write. Literacy rates are somewhere between 5 and 10% at best, and that's counting priests and monks who make up a large portion of literate people. Among peasants, literacy is probably less than 1%. This means that knowledge is transmitted orally and through direct experience. You learn by watching and doing. The problem with this is that incorrect information and superstitions get passed down just as easily as useful knowledge. People believe the earth is flat. Actually, that's a myth. Educated people in the Middle Ages knew the earth was round. The ancient Greeks had figured that out centuries earlier, and that knowledge was preserved. But common people? They think the earth is flat because why wouldn't it be? It looks flat. People believe in spontaneous generation, the idea that living things can arise from non-living matter. They think that maggots spontaneously generate from rotting meat, that mice spontaneously generate from piles of grain, and that frogs spontaneously generate from mud. This seems logical if you don't understand biology and you see maggots appearing in meat. They believe in the 4 elements: earth, air, fire, and water. Everything is made of some combination of these 4 elements. This is wrong, but it's the prevailing scientific theory. They believe in astrology. The position of stars and planets at the moment of your birth determines your personality and fate. Even educated people believe this. Astrology is considered a legitimate science. Important decisions are made based on astrological predictions. They believe that the sun revolves around the earth. Heliocentrism, the correct idea that the earth revolves around the sun, has been proposed by a few ancient Greek thinkers, but it's not widely accepted and won't be until the Renaissance. Medical knowledge, as we've discussed, is based on completely incorrect theories. Diseases are caused by imbalanced humors or bad air or sin or the alignment of planets or curses. The idea that tiny, invisible organisms could cause disease is so far beyond medieval understanding that it might as well be magic. Maps are wildly inaccurate. Most people have never seen a map and wouldn't be able to read one if they did. Even the maps used by educated people and sailors are full of errors. Large portions of the world are simply marked as unknown or filled with drawings of sea monsters and exotic beasts. The Americas don't appear on European maps because Europeans don't know the Americas exist until the very end of the Middle Ages. History is a mix of fact, legend, and pure fiction. People believe that King Arthur was real and that his knights literally went on quests for the Holy Grail. They believe in Prester John, a mythical Christian king who supposedly rules a kingdom somewhere in the East. They believe in dog-headed people, people with no heads whose faces are in their chests, and other fantastical creatures that supposedly live in distant lands. Science as we understand it doesn't exist. There's no scientific method. There are no controlled experiments. Natural philosophy exists, but it's primarily based on reading ancient texts and engaging in logical argumentation, not on observation and experimentation. Alchemy exists, but it's a mix of primitive chemistry and mysticism. Alchemists are trying to turn lead into gold and create elixirs of immortality, which doesn't work because it's impossible. Mathematics is limited. Arabic numerals, which we use today, are slowly being introduced to Europe from the Islamic world, but Roman numerals are still widely used. Try doing complex calculations with Roman numerals. It's incredibly difficult. The concept of zero has only recently been introduced to European mathematics. Advanced mathematics is really only accessible to a handful of scholars. The sum total of human knowledge is incredibly limited. The great libraries of the ancient world, like the Library of Alexandria, have been destroyed. Much knowledge has been lost. What remains is preserved in monasteries where monks painstakingly copy manuscripts by hand. Books are rare and expensive. A single book might cost as much as a house. If you want to learn something, you basically have two options. Find someone who knows it and convince them to teach you, or join a monastery and hope they have books on the subject. That's it. There are no public schools, no libraries, no internet, no Encyclopedia Britannica. Universities exist in the later Middle Ages, but they're accessible only to a tiny elite. They teach theology, law, medicine, and the liberal arts, all based primarily on ancient texts from Greece and Rome. The curriculum hasn't changed in centuries. Innovation is rare because the focus is on preserving and interpreting old knowledge, not discovering new knowledge. The church controls what can be taught and what can be written. Any idea that contradicts church doctrine is heresy. Heresy can get you tortured and killed, so scholars are very careful to stay within acceptable bounds. This stifles intellectual progress. The Islamic world is far more advanced in terms of knowledge during this period. Islamic scholars are making advances in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and other fields. They're preserving and translating ancient Greek texts that have been lost in Europe. But there's limited contact between the Islamic world and Christian Europe beyond war and trade, so this knowledge transfers slowly. Part 4. Additional Horrors. Chapter 12. Crime and Punishment Details. We touched on this earlier, but let's go deeper into crime and punishment because it's truly horrifying. The medieval justice system is based on the idea that punishment should be a deterrent. The more severe and public the punishment, the more it will discourage others from committing crimes. This leads to spectacularly brutal punishments for even minor offenses. Theft is one of the most common crimes because everyone is poor and desperate. The punishment for theft varies depending on what you stole and who you stole it from. Steal from a nobleman or from the church, and you're in serious trouble. You might be hanged, or you might have your hand cut off. That's right, amputation is a common punishment. One hand for a first offense, the second hand for a second offense. After that, you're a handless beggar, and you're going to starve to death. Poaching is a serious crime. All the forests belong to the nobility, and all the game animals in those forests are the property of the nobility. If you kill a deer to feed your starving family, you've stolen from your lord, and the penalty is death. You'll be hanged, and your body will be left hanging as a warning to others. The nobility need those deer for sport hunting. Your need to eat doesn't matter. Murder is, obviously, a capital crime. But here's the thing. Proving murder is difficult, and the punishment depends on who you killed. If a peasant kills another peasant, it might be handled locally by the feudal lord. If a peasant kills a nobleman, it's automatic death, and the execution will be especially brutal to make an example. The death penalty is used for a staggering number of crimes, not just murder, but also rape, arson, treason, heresy, sorcery, counterfeiting, and even persistent theft. Executions are public and designed to be as terrifying as possible. Hanging is the most common method of execution, but it's not the quick drop that breaks your neck like in later centuries. Medieval hanging is slow strangulation. You're hoisted up by a rope around your neck, and you dangle there, slowly suffocating, while a crowd watches. It can take 10 minutes or more to die. It's agonizing. Beheading is reserved for nobility. It's considered a more honorable death. If you're going to be executed and you're important enough, you might be beheaded instead of hanged. Of course, the executioner needs to be skilled. If he's not, he might need multiple swings of the axe, which is exactly as horrible as it sounds. Burning at the stake is used primarily for heretics and witches. You're tied to a pole, wood is piled around you, and it's set on fire. You die from smoke inhalation if you're lucky, or from burning if you're not. This is the fate of thousands of people accused of heresy during the Middle Ages. Drawing and quartering is reserved for the worst crimes, particularly treason. You're dragged through the streets tied to a horse. That's the drawing. Then hanged until almost dead. Then cut down and disemboweled while still alive. And then your body is cut into 4 pieces. That's the quartering. Your head is cut off and displayed on a spike. Your body parts are sent to different cities to be displayed as a warning. Breaking on the wheel is another spectacularly brutal punishment. You're tied to a large wooden wheel, and an executioner uses a hammer or iron bar to break your major bones: arms, legs, shoulders, hips. Then the wheel is hoisted up on a pole, and you're left to die slowly from shock and dehydration over the course of days. Sometimes birds peck at you while you're still alive. For lesser crimes, you might be placed in the stocks or the pillory. These are wooden devices that lock your head and hands in place in the town square. You're stuck there for hours or days while townspeople throw rotten food, mud, and excrement at you. Sometimes people beat you. Sometimes you die from exposure or from injuries inflicted by the crowd. Dunking is a punishment often used for women accused of being scolds or nags. You're strapped into a chair and repeatedly plunged into a river or pond until you nearly drown. This is done multiple times. It's humiliating and dangerous. Branding is common. If you're convicted of certain crimes, a letter is burned into your skin with a hot iron. T for thief, M for murderer, and so on. This marks you permanently as a criminal. Everyone can see your mark, and you'll never escape your past. Prison, as we understand it, barely exists. There are dungeons, but they're used to hold people awaiting trial or execution, not as punishment itself. Long-term imprisonment is rare because it's expensive to keep someone locked up and fed. Punishments are swift and physical: beatings, mutilation, or death. Torture is routinely used to extract confessions. The rack stretches your body until your joints pop out of their sockets. The thumbscrew crushes your thumbs and fingers. The Iron Maiden, though probably a later invention and possibly a myth, supposedly was a sarcophagus with spikes inside. You're forced inside, and the door is slowly closed, the spikes gradually piercing your body. Whether or not that specific device existed, devices like it certainly did. Water torture involves forcing water down your throat until your stomach is painfully distended, then pressing on your stomach. Strapado involves tying your hands behind your back and hoisting you up by a rope attached to your wrists, dislocating your shoulders. Almost everyone who is tortured confesses to something, whether they did it or not, because the pain is unbearable. This makes torture completely unreliable as a method of finding truth, but medieval authorities don't care. A confession is a confession. Chapter 13. Women's Lives. Extra oppression. It's important to examine the specific situation of women during the medieval period, as they faced particular challenges beyond the general hardships of the era. Social status and perception: women were considered legally dependent. Medieval medical and theological texts described women as inferior to men in physical and intellectual terms. They were viewed as more emotional and less rational. Religious doctrine used the biblical story of Eve to justify this perspective. This interpretation profoundly influenced social attitudes toward women throughout the period. Marriage and family life. A woman's value was largely determined by her ability to bear children, particularly sons. Inability to have children was seen as a serious deficiency. Bearing only daughters was considered a failure, and husbands might seek annulments or take other measures. Marriage was typically arranged by fathers when girls were between 12 and 16 years old. Personal choice was not part of the process. Girls married according to their father's decisions, sometimes meeting their future husband only on the wedding day. The wedding night marked the beginning of intimate relations. Young brides had little knowledge about what to expect. Husbands had complete authority in the relationship according to both law and church teaching. Women were expected to fulfill their marital duties regardless of their own wishes. Refusal was considered sinful and a violation of marriage vows. The church supported husbands' authority in these matters. Pregnancy and childbirth pregnancy was frequent throughout childbearing years. Without effective contraception, and with the church opposing pregnancy prevention, women experienced numerous pregnancies. Medieval married women typically went through 6 to 8 pregnancies, often spending 20 years either pregnant or nursing. Each pregnancy carried significant risk. Childbirth was the leading cause of mortality for women of childbearing age. This means the most dangerous activity a woman undertook was something she was expected to repeat multiple times. Infant mortality was extremely common and normalized. When babies didn't survive, mothers were expected to grieve briefly before attempting another pregnancy. Children born with disabilities or deformities were sometimes viewed as signs of sin or supernatural influence. Mothers might be blamed for their child's condition, with medieval beliefs holding that a mother's experiences during pregnancy could physically affect the baby. Legal status and protection. Domestic discipline was legal and accepted. Husbands had authority to physically punish their wives provided they didn't cause death or permanent injury. Historical references suggest specific guidelines about acceptable levels of physical correction. Women who experienced harsh treatment had few options for help. Families might sympathize, but rarely intervened. Legal systems offered no protection. Religious teaching emphasized wifely obedience and submission to husbands. Divorce was nearly impossible, except in rare circumstances requiring church permission. Annulment required proving the marriage was invalid from the beginning, which demanded political connections or wealth most women lacked. Women remained in their marriages for life. Widowhood. If a husband died, a woman became a widow. Wealthy widows might gain some control over property, though the husband's family often contested this. Poor widows faced poverty and vulnerability, sometimes forced to remarry quickly for survival. If you don't remarry, you're at the mercy of society. Widows are targets for theft and assault because they have no male protector. You're also suspected of witchcraft more readily than married women, because you exist outside the normal social structure of male control. Speaking of witchcraft, witch hunts really ramp up at the end of the Middle Ages and into the early modern period, but they start in the medieval period. Accusations of witchcraft are disproportionately leveled against women, particularly old women and women who don't conform to social norms. Are you a healer who knows about herbs? You might be accused of witchcraft. Are you too outspoken or too independent? Witch. Are you unpopular in your community? Witch. Did someone's crops fail after you had an argument with them? Obviously, you cursed them with your witchcraft. Accused witches are tortured until they confess. Then they're executed, usually by burning. Thousands of women are killed in witch hunts over the centuries. The actual number is disputed by historians, but it's at minimum in the thousands, possibly tens of thousands. Women have almost no legal rights. You can't own property in most places. You can't enter into contracts. You can't represent yourself in court. You need a male guardian, either your father, your husband, or if you're widowed, possibly your adult son or a male relative. You can't hold most jobs. There are some jobs available to women: spinning, weaving, brewing ale, baking, domestic service, and sex work. That's about it. Professional guilds typically don't admit women. You can't be a craftsman You can't be a merchant in your own right, though you might help your husband in his business. Education is almost entirely unavailable to women. Some noble women learn to read, but that's rare. The vast majority of women are illiterate. There's no point in educating a woman, according to medieval thinking. Her job is to have babies and keep house, not to think. Nuns are the exception. Joining a convent is actually one of the few ways a woman can gain some education and autonomy. Nuns learn to read so they can pray and study religious texts. Some abbesses, the leaders of convents, wield significant power, but even nuns are under the authority of male church officials. Entering a convent requires a dowry, just like marriage, so it's not an option for poor women. Also, your family has to agree to let you become a nun. You can't just decide on your own. If you're not married and not a nun, your options are extremely limited. You're stuck living with your family, probably taking care of your parents as they age. You're seen as a burden, a failed woman, someone who didn't fulfill her purpose. Chapter 14. More hygiene nightmares. Let's go even deeper into just how disgusting daily life is in the Middle Ages, because we really need to drive this point home. Your house smells terrible. There's no escaping the smell. The thatch roof is rotting and moldy. The rushes on the floor are full of old food scraps, spilled ale, dog piss, and who knows what else. You're supposed to replace the rushes regularly, but that's labor-intensive, so you don't do it as often as you should. The bottom layers of rushes are composting into a disgusting sludge. The animals living in your house with you smell. They produce waste that you have to clean up, or more realistically, that just accumulates. Your house is full of flies in the summer. Flies everywhere. On your food, on your face, on every surface. Flies spreading disease from animal waste to your dinner. You're covered in fleas. Fleas live in your clothes, in your hair, in your bedding. They bite you constantly. You're always itchy. Scratching is just a constant background activity. Fleas also carry disease, including the plague, but you don't know that. Your teeth are rotting in your mouth. They hurt constantly. You can't chew properly, which makes eating even more unpleasant. Your breath smells terrible. Everyone's breath smells terrible. Oral hygiene doesn't exist. Some people try to clean their teeth by rubbing them with a cloth, but that's about it. You have body odor, powerful body odor. You smell like sweat, smoke, and dirt. Everyone does. You're so used to it that you barely notice anymore, but the smell is overwhelming. This is why when perfumes become available, the wealthy douse themselves in perfume. They're trying to cover up the stench. Your clothes are filthy and full of holes. You patch them repeatedly, but eventually they just fall apart. When you get new clothes, which happens rarely, they're stiff and uncomfortable until they're broken in. Wool is itchy. Linen is better, but more expensive. You're uncomfortable in your clothes basically all the time. You're cold in the winter and hot in the summer because your clothes are inappropriate for the weather, but they're all you have. You can't just go to a store and buy season-appropriate clothing. You have what you have. Your bedding is a sack of straw, as mentioned before. The straw gets crushed and broken down, so you're basically sleeping on a lumpy mat of straw dust. It's also full of insects. Bedbugs are universal. They bite you all night long. You wake up with red welts all over your body. This is normal. If you're lucky, you have a blanket. It's probably wool, probably full of moths and moth larvae, and definitely scratchy. You huddle under it in the winter and try not to freeze to death. Privacy doesn't exist. Your entire family sleeps in the same room, often in the same bed. Multiple people sharing one bed is normal. You can hear everything everyone else is doing. There's no privacy for anything, including sex. Parents have sex while their children are sleeping a few feet away. Everyone pretends not to notice. The air inside your house is smoky from the fire, which burns constantly. Your eyes sting. Your throat hurts. You cough a lot. Everyone coughs constantly. Respiratory problems are universal. Going to the bathroom, as we discussed, means going outside and squatting. In the winter, This means going out into the freezing cold and snow. In the middle of the night, people often use a chamber pot inside the house rather than go outside in the dark. Then someone has to empty the chamber pot in the morning, which is a horrible job usually given to children or the lowest-ranking member of the household. If you live in a city, waste disposal is a constant problem. Cities are filthy beyond belief. The streets are narrow and unpaved. They're basically open sewers. People throw their garbage and waste into the street. Butchers slaughter animals and throw the guts and blood into the street. Tanners process hides using urine and feces, and the runoff goes into the street. When it rains, the streets flood with a disgusting mixture of water, sewage, blood, rotting garbage, and animal waste. You have to wade through this. Your shoes, if you even have shoes, get ruined. Your clothes get splattered with filth. Many people don't have shoes. They walk barefoot through this disgusting mess. Foot injuries and infections are common. Stepping on something sharp and getting an infection can kill you. The smell in cities is indescribable. Imagine the worst smell you've ever experienced, and then imagine that everywhere, all the time. You can't escape it. It seeps into your clothes, your hair, everything. Rivers running through cities are unbelievably polluted. They're brown or black with waste. Dead animals float in them. You can smell them from a distance. Yet people still use these rivers for water because what choice do they have? Chapter 15. Warfare. Constant danger. Let's talk more about warfare, because if you're a man in the Middle Ages, there's a good chance you're going to experience war firsthand. Wars are frequent. Kingdoms fight each other over territory, succession, and resources. Nobles fight each other over land and insults to their honor. The Crusades drag on for centuries, sending wave after wave of soldiers to die in the desert. As a peasant, you don't get to choose whether or not you go to war. When your lord decides to fight, he levies troops from his lands. That means you. You're given a weapon, maybe a spear or a bow, and you're expected to fight. You get minimal training. You've probably never been in a fight before, let alone a battle. Too bad, you're a soldier now. Medieval warfare is absolute chaos. There are no uniforms, so it's sometimes hard to tell who's on which side. Battles are massive, confused melees with thousands of men trying to kill each other. The noise is deafening. Men are screaming, metal is clanging, horses are shrieking. The smell of blood and opened bowels fills the air. If you're in the front line, you're probably going to die. The casualty rates for common soldiers are staggering. Nobles in armor on horseback might survive, but you're on foot with minimal protection. A sword, an axe, an arrow, a hammer to the skull, and you're done. If you're not killed instantly, you might die slowly from your wounds. There's no battlefield medicine to speak of. If you're stabbed or cut, you're going to bleed out or die of infection. Arrows are particularly nasty. They're designed to penetrate flesh and they're hard to remove. Trying to pull an arrow out causes even more damage. If you survive the battle, congratulations. Now you get to participate in the aftermath, which is somehow even worse. Armies pillage the defeated side's territory. Towns and villages are burned. Civilians are murdered, raped, and enslaved. This happens even if you're on the winning side. Soldiers loot and rape as a reward for victory. Your own army is almost as dangerous to you as the enemy. Disease sweeps through military camps. Dysentery, typhus, and other diseases kill more soldiers than combat does. Camps are filthy, overcrowded, and unsanitary. Food is scarce and often spoiled. You're cold, wet, hungry, and sick most of the time. Desertion is common because obviously people don't want to be there. But if you're caught deserting, you'll be executed as an example to others. So you're trapped between the danger of battle and the danger of trying to escape. Sieges are particularly horrible. If you're attacking a castle or fortified town, you might spend months camped outside, trying to starve the defenders into submission. During this time, you're exposed to the weather, disease, and periodic sorties by the defenders who come out and kill as many besiegers as they can before retreating. If you're defending during a siege, you're trapped inside, slowly starving. Food runs out. Water runs out. Disease spreads in the confined, overcrowded space. Eventually, people start eating horses, then dogs, then rats. There are documented cases of sieges where people resorted to cannibalism. When a city falls after a siege, the attacking army often massacres the population. This is standard practice. Men are killed, women are raped, children are enslaved. The city is looted and often burned. This is what happens to the losers of medieval warfare. Even if you survive your military service and return home, you're probably traumatized and injured. There's no such thing as PTSD treatment or veteran support. You're expected to just go back to farming and pretend nothing happened. Many soldiers become bandits because they can't readjust to normal life, and they have no other skills besides violence. The weapons of medieval warfare are designed to cause maximum damage to the human body. Swords are for cutting and stabbing. Battle axes split skulls and sever limbs. Maces and warhammers crush bones. Crossbows and longbows punch through armor and flesh. Polearms hook and pull riders off horses, then finish them on the ground. Being killed in battle is not quick or clean like in the movies. You're stabbed multiple times, hacked at with swords and axes, beaten with clubs. You die slowly, in agony, on a muddy field while the battle continues around you. Your body is left to rot where it falls, or it's looted for anything valuable, then left to rot. Mass graves are dug after major battles. Thousands of bodies are thrown into pits and covered with dirt. No individual graves, no markers, no dignity. You're just one of thousands of dead men whose names will be forgotten. Chapter 16. Superstition and Fear. The medieval mind is dominated by superstition and fear. Without scientific knowledge to explain natural phenomena, people attribute everything to supernatural causes. You believe in demons. Demons are real, active forces in the world. They tempt people to sin, possess people's bodies, cause disease, and generally work to damn souls to hell. Exorcisms are performed regularly by priests. People who behave strangely or have seizures are thought to be possessed by demons. You believe in witches, as we've discussed. Witches make pacts with the devil and use dark magic to harm their neighbors. Any unexplained misfortune can be blamed on witchcraft. Your cow died? Someone cursed it. Your child got sick? Someone cast the evil eye on them. An old woman muttered something under her breath as you passed? She probably hexed you. You believe in ghosts. The dead don't always rest peacefully. Ghosts haunt the places where they died, especially if they died violently or without proper burial. Graveyards are terrifying places. You avoid them at night. Strange noises are attributed to restless spirits. You believe in fairies, though medieval fairies are not cute and friendly like modern depictions. Medieval fairies are dangerous, capricious beings who steal babies and replace them with changelings, lead travelers astray, and cause mischief. You leave offerings to appease them. You avoid fairy rings and other places where fairies are said to dwell. You believe that certain people have the evil eye and can curse you just by looking at you. You wear amulets and charms to protect yourself. You make the sign of the cross constantly to ward off evil. Dreams are believed to be messages from God or the devil. Prophetic dreams predict the future. Nightmares are demonic attacks. You take your dreams very seriously and consult priests about their meanings. Omens are everywhere. A black cat crossing your path is bad luck. Breaking a mirror brings misfortune. Seeing a crow might mean death is coming. The appearance of a comet is a dire omen of disaster. Every strange occurrence is a sign of something. Natural phenomena that we understand today are terrifying mysteries in the Middle Ages. Eclipses are signs of God's anger. Earthquakes are divine punishment. Lightning strikes are God's wrath. You have no way of predicting these events or understanding their causes, so they're frightening and seemingly random. Disease is punishment for sin, so when you get sick, you assume you've done something to anger God. You pray for forgiveness. You make offerings to the church. You promise to reform your behavior if God will cure you. Sometimes priests suggest that your illness is a test of faith. Mental illness is attributed to demonic possession, imbalanced humors, or divine punishment. People with mental illness are often locked away, beaten, or subjected to exorcisms. There's no understanding of psychological conditions as medical problems. Animals are believed to have symbolic and mystical meanings. Certain animals are associated with the devil. Cats, especially black cats, toads, ravens, and bats. If you see these animals, especially in unusual circumstances, it might be a sign of witchcraft or demonic activity. Plants and herbs are believed to have magical as well as medicinal properties. Mandrake root is said to scream when pulled from the ground, and the scream can kill you. So people tie dogs to the plant and make the dogs pull it up. Garlic wards off evil. Rowan wood protects against witchcraft. Saints are intermediaries between humans and God. You pray to specific saints for specific problems. Saint Anthony for lost items, Saint Christopher for safe travel, Saint Apollonia for toothaches. There are saints for everything. You might wear a saint's medal or carry a relic for protection. Relics, as mentioned before, are believed to have miraculous powers. A piece of a saint's bone, a fragment of the true cross, a vial of holy water from a sacred site, these things can supposedly heal the sick, protect against evil, and bring good fortune. People pay large sums for relics, even though most are fake. Pilgrimages are a major part of religious life. Going on pilgrimage to a holy site is supposed to earn you spiritual merit and potentially grant miracles. Sick people make pilgrimages hoping to be cured. Sinners make pilgrimages as penance. Some people go on pilgrimage multiple times in their lives despite the danger and difficulty of travel. The devil is real and active in the world. He's constantly trying to tempt people into sin and damn their souls. He can appear in disguises and trick people. Stories of people making deals with the devil are common. The Faust legend originates in this period. Hell is real and terrifying. Church artwork depicts hell in graphic detail, demons torturing sinners, fire and brimstone, eternal suffering. This is where you'll go if you die with unconfessed mortal sins. The fear of hell is a constant presence in medieval life. It controls behavior and reinforces church authority. Heaven is real, but extremely hard to get into. You have to live a sinless life, which is basically impossible, so you're probably going to purgatory first. Purgatory is a place where sins are burned away before you can enter heaven. You'll suffer there for an unknown length of time. Your living relatives can help reduce your time in purgatory by praying for you and paying for masses to be said for your soul. The apocalypse could happen at any time. The end of the world is imminent. This belief intensifies during periods of crisis like plagues, famines, and wars. People interpret disasters as signs that the end times are near. Apocalyptic cults form. Some people give away all their possessions and prepare for the second coming of Christ. Part 5. More Suffering. Chapter 17. Government and Authority. Let's talk about government and how power works in the Middle Ages, because it's a system designed to keep you powerless and oppressed. The king is at the top of the feudal hierarchy. He's supposedly chosen by God. His authority is divine. Questioning the king is not just treason, it's blasphemy. The king can do basically whatever he wants. There's no constitution limiting his power, no elected officials checking him, no rights that he has to respect. Kings wage wars on a whim, often for personal glory or petty grievances. Your life means nothing in these calculations. You're taxed to pay for the king's wars, and you're conscripted to fight in them, and you have no say in any of it. Below the king are the nobles, dukes, counts, barons, and knights. These people own vast amounts of land and have enormous power over everyone living on that land. They collect taxes, administer justice, raise armies, and generally do whatever they want. You have no rights against noble authority. If a noble decides he wants your land, he takes it. If he wants to increase your taxes, he increases them. If he wants to conscript your son for his army, your son goes. You can't protest, you can't vote, you can't do anything. The law is not applied equally. There's one law for nobles and another for commoners. A noble who kills a peasant might pay a fine. A peasant who injures a noble is executed. Justice is not blind. It's very clearly biased toward the powerful. Corruption is rampant at every level. Officials take bribes. Judges rule in favor of whoever pays them more. Taxes are collected, and then a large portion is skimmed off by collectors before it reaches the king. Everyone in power is enriching themselves at the expense of the people below them. You can't appeal to a higher authority because everyone above you in the hierarchy is also corrupt, also interested in maintaining the status quo. The system is designed to benefit those at the top and keep everyone else in their place. Rebellion is nearly impossible. Peasant revolts do happen occasionally, most famously the English Peasants' Revolt of 1381, but they're almost always crushed brutally. Rebellious peasants are hunted down and executed en masse. Entire villages are burned as punishment. Rebellion is not a realistic option for improving your situation. The church is intertwined with secular government. Bishops are often also political advisors and administrators. The Pope has his own territory and army. The church collects its own taxes, tithes, and operates its own court system for religious matters. You're subject to both secular and religious authority, and they reinforce each other. Excommunication is a political tool. If a king angers the Pope can excommunicate him, which means all his subjects are released from their oaths of loyalty. This is an enormously powerful threat. It's been used to bring kings to heel multiple times. There's no concept of human rights. You don't have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of movement, or any other rights we take for granted today. You have only the privileges your Lord chooses to grant you, and those can be revoked at any time. Women have even fewer rights than men. As we've discussed, women are essentially property. They can't hold office, can't own land independently in most cases, can't vote, not that men can vote either, and can't participate in government in any way. Jews are persecuted throughout medieval Europe. They're forced to live in segregated ghettos, forced to wear identifying badges or hats, barred from most professions, and periodically subjected to violent pogroms. When things go wrong, they're convenient scapegoats. During the Black Death, Jews were accused of poisoning wells and were murdered by mobs. The entire system is designed to keep power concentrated in the hands of a tiny elite while keeping everyone else poor, ignorant, and obedient. And it works. For centuries, this system persists with only minor variations. Chapter 18. Childhood Mortality Details. We need to go deeper into just how dangerous childhood is, because the statistics are truly horrifying. As mentioned, up to 40% of children die before their first birthday. But let's talk about what actually kills them. Diarrheal diseases are a major killer. Contaminated water and food cause chronic diarrhea, which leads to severe dehydration. Without modern rehydration therapy, babies die within days. Respiratory infections kill enormous numbers of children. Pneumonia, bronchitis, and other lung infections are death sentences for young children whose immune systems can't fight them off. Living in smoky, poorly ventilated houses makes respiratory infections even more common and deadly. Childhood diseases that we vaccinate against today run rampant. Measles kills thousands of children. Smallpox leaves survivors scarred and sometimes blind. Whooping cough causes children to cough so hard they break ribs and can't breathe. Diphtheria causes the throat to swell shut, suffocating children. These diseases sweep through communities regularly, killing children in large numbers. Malnutrition weakens children and makes them vulnerable to diseases they might otherwise survive. Many children are chronically malnourished because there simply isn't enough food. They're stunted in growth, weak, and sick. Accidents kill many children. Children fall into fires, drown in wells and rivers, are kicked or trampled by animals, fall from heights, and have countless other accidents. There's no child-proofing, no safety regulations, no adult supervision most of the time because adults are busy working. Some children are killed by violence, either accidentally during domestic disputes or deliberately through infanticide. Unwanted babies, especially girls or babies with disabilities, are sometimes smothered, abandoned in the woods, or left outside to die of exposure. Child abuse happens frequently. Children are beaten for misbehavior or just because adults are frustrated and violent. Some children are beaten to death. This is rarely punished because children are property and parents can discipline them however they see fit. If you survive childhood, you're likely physically damaged. You might have stunted growth from malnutrition. You probably have scars from injuries and infections. Your teeth are already rotting. You might have chronic health problems from childhood diseases. Child labor has probably already damaged your body. The psychological impact of medieval childhood is also severe, though that's not recognized. Children watch their siblings die. They're exposed to violence regularly. They're put to work at ages when they should be playing. Many are beaten frequently. The concept of childhood trauma doesn't exist, but the trauma is very real. Parents can't afford to get too attached to their children because the odds are good that at least some of them will die. This creates a strange emotional distance. Parents love their children, but they also have to protect themselves emotionally from the constant possibility of loss. There's no such thing as pediatric medicine. Children are treated like small adults. They're given the same, ineffective remedies as adults, just in smaller doses. There's no understanding of child development or age-appropriate care. Birth order matters enormously. The eldest son inherits everything in most cases. Younger sons have to make their own way in the world, usually by joining the church or becoming knights if they're noble, or by learning a trade if they're common. Daughters are married off, with the eldest daughter usually receiving a larger dowry. Being a younger child means you're less valuable to your family. You might be apprenticed out very young, sent to work as a servant in another household, or if your family can afford it, sent to a monastery or convent. You're expendable in a way that the heir is not. Chapter 19. Famine, slow death. We've touched on food, but let's really drive home how precarious food security is in the Middle Ages. Famine is a regular occurrence. It's not a question of if there will be a famine, but when. Famines are caused by crop failures, which happen for various reasons: drought, too much rain, early frosts, plant diseases, insect plagues, and warfare destroying crops and fields. When crops fail, people starve. There's no food storage infrastructure, no international food aid, no emergency supplies. During a famine, food prices skyrocket. If you have any money, you spend it all on food, but there's not enough food to buy, regardless of how much money you have. Markets are empty, grain stores are depleted. People eat seed grain that was meant for next year's planting, which means next year will be even worse. You start eating things that aren't normally food: tree bark, grass, leather, anything you can possibly digest. Your body starts to consume itself. You become skeletal. Your hair falls out. Your teeth loosen. You're constantly weak and dizzy. Children and the elderly die first during famines. They're the most vulnerable. Then adults start dying. Bodies pile up. There's no one strong enough to bury them all, so they're left in the streets or in mass graves. Social order breaks down during severe famines. People steal food from each other. Riots break out. In the most extreme cases, there are documented instances of cannibalism. People kill and eat strangers, or even family members. This is the absolute nadir of medieval existence, but it happens during the worst famines. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 killed millions across Europe. Unusual weather patterns caused crops to fail for multiple years in a row. The death toll was between 10 and 25% of the population in affected areas. That's comparable to the Black Death in some regions. Even in years without famine, there's a hungry season. This is the period in late winter and early spring when last year's harvest has been consumed, and this year's crops haven't come in yet. Everyone is hungry during this time every year. You're surviving on stored grain, preserved food, and hope. The wealthy are somewhat insulated from famine because they can afford to buy food at inflated prices, and they have larger reserves. But even nobles feel the effects of major famines. Food becomes a constant obsession for everyone. Food preservation is critical to survival. You preserve food by drying, smoking, salting, or pickling. Meat is salted or smoked. Fish is dried or salted. Vegetables are pickled. Fruit is dried. Everything is designed to last through the winter, but preserved food is often unappetizing and sometimes unsafe. Salt preservation requires a lot of salt, which is expensive. Food that's not properly preserved spoils and makes people sick, but you eat it anyway because it's all you have. Hunting is restricted, as mentioned before. Poaching game from the Lord's forest is punishable by death, but people do it anyway when they're desperate. The risk of being hanged is preferable to starving to death slowly. Fishing is allowed in many places, but overfishing depletes stocks. Fish populations can't sustain the constant pressure, so catches decline over time. Your relationship with food is completely different from modern relationships with food. Food is not something you enjoy. Food is fuel for survival. You eat to avoid starvation. That's it. The concept of eating for pleasure, of being a foodie, is completely foreign. If the food tastes bad but provides calories, you eat it gratefully. Feast days are special because they're the rare occasions when there's actually enough food and maybe even good food. Religious festivals involve feasting, which is a huge motivation for celebrating them. Christmas, Easter, and harvest festivals are times when you might actually eat well for a day or two. But those feast days make the regular days of hunger even harder to bear. You know what it's like to have enough food, and that makes the constant gnawing hunger even worse. Chapter 20. Old Age, No Reward. Let's say you've beaten all the odds. You've survived childhood, avoided dying in childbirth or war, avoided plague, famine, and accident, and you've actually made it to old age. Congratulations! Your reward is being old in the Middle Ages, which is also terrible. Old age starts young in the Middle Ages. By 40, you're considered old. Your body is worn out from decades of hard labor, poor nutrition, and lack of medical care. You look ancient by modern standards. You're bent over, missing teeth, covered in scars, and in constant pain. Arthritis is universal among the elderly. Your joints ache constantly. Moving is painful. You can't work as hard as you used to, which means you're less valuable. Your eyesight is failing. Glasses exist, but they're expensive and primitive. If you can't afford glasses, which you probably can't, you just have to deal with being unable to see properly. Your hearing is probably failing too. Years of living in noisy environments, plus lack of medical care for ear infections, have damaged your hearing. If you're a peasant, you can't retire. There's no retirement. You work until you physically can't anymore. When you can't work, you become dependent on your children to support you. If you don't have children, or if your children are unwilling or unable to support you, you're in serious trouble. You might end up begging. Elderly beggars are common in medieval towns and cities. You sit by the roadside or near churches, hoping people will give you scraps. If you're disabled and can't work, you might end up in a hospital, which in the Middle Ages is more like a poorhouse than a modern hospital. Hospitals are run by the church and are supposed to provide care for the sick and indigent, but they're overcrowded, filthy, and offer minimal actual care. You're given a place to sleep and maybe some food, but that's about it. Dementia and cognitive decline happen just like they do today, but there's no understanding of these conditions. If you start losing your memory or acting confused, people think you're being cursed or possessed. You might be treated badly or even accused of witchcraft. The elderly command some respect in medieval society, particularly if they're men from respected families. Their experience and knowledge are valued. Elders often advise younger people and help settle disputes. But this only applies if you're still mentally sharp and come from a good family. If you're poor and declining mentally, you're just a burden. Women have it particularly hard in old age. Elderly women are more likely to be accused of witchcraft than any other demographic. You're no longer useful for bearing children. You might be widowed. You're seen as unnatural, a woman who's outlived her purpose. Life expectancy, as mentioned, is 30 to 35 years on average. But remember, that's skewed by high infant mortality. If you make it to adulthood, you might live into your 50s or 60s. But living into your 70s or 80s is rare. You're a curiosity if you live that long. The very elderly are sometimes revered as living connections to the past. If you're 80 years old, you can remember events from 60 years ago, and in a world without written records for common people, you're a living history book. But you're also probably in very poor health and suffering greatly. There's no pain management for the elderly beyond alcohol and maybe some herbal remedies. You just have to endure constant pain. Arthritis, old injuries, rotting teeth, failing organs, all of it hurts, and there's nothing to be done about it. Death, when it finally comes, might be a relief. You've lived a hard life, you're in constant pain, and you're probably ready to go. The church promises that heaven awaits if you've lived a good life, and that's your only comfort. Part 6. Perspective and Conclusion. Chapter 21. Modern Life Comparison. Now let's take a moment to really appreciate how good we have it today by directly comparing medieval life to modern life. You wake up in a comfortable bed with clean sheets. You walk to a bathroom with running water. You turn on a light with the flip of a switch. You take a hot shower. You brush your teeth with a toothbrush and toothpaste. None of this exists in the Middle Ages. You eat breakfast. Maybe cereal with milk from the refrigerator. Maybe toast from the toaster. Maybe eggs you cooked on a stove in minutes. The food is fresh, safe, and delicious. In the Middle Ages, breakfast is stale bread and weak ale if you're lucky. You get dressed in clean clothes that you washed in a washing machine. You put on comfortable, seasonally appropriate clothing. You might check your smartphone to see the weather. In the Middle Ages, you put on the same filthy wool clothes you wear every day. You commute to work or school in a car, bus, or train. The trip takes minutes or maybe an hour. It's safe, relatively comfortable, and reliable. In the Middle Ages, traveling any significant distance is dangerous, takes days, and might get you killed. You work in a climate-controlled environment. Your job probably doesn't involve back-breaking physical labor. You get breaks, you get lunch, you get paid a wage that allows you to buy food, shelter, and entertainment. In the Middle Ages, you work in the fields from dawn to dusk, and most of what you produce goes to your lord. You get sick, you go to a doctor. The doctor diagnoses your illness using modern medical knowledge and technology. You get antibiotics or other medications. You recover. In the Middle Ages, you get sick, you pray, and you probably die. You have hobbies. You read books, watch movies and TV, play video games, play sports, create art, or engage in hundreds of other activities for fun. In the Middle Ages, entertainment is limited to gossip, drinking, and very occasional festivals. You have rights. You can vote. You can own property. You can move freely. You can speak your mind without being executed for it. You can practice whatever religion you want or no religion at all. None of this is true in the Middle Ages. You're educated. You can read and write. You have access to the accumulated knowledge of human civilization through the internet. You can learn about anything you want. In the Middle Ages, you're probably illiterate and ignorant of anything beyond your immediate surroundings. You live in relative safety. Yes, crime exists, but you're not in constant danger of being murdered, raped, or robbed. The rule of law exists and is enforced somewhat fairly. In the Middle Ages, violence is constant and authority is arbitrary. You have options. You can choose your career, choose your partner, choose where to live, choose how to live. In the Middle Ages, all of this is determined by your birth, and you have virtually no agency over your own life. You expect to live 70 or 80 years, maybe longer. Your children will probably all survive to adulthood. Your risk of dying in childbirth is minimal. You'll probably never experience famine. You'll probably never experience war firsthand. All of these things are nearly certain to happen to you in the Middle Ages. Modern life has problems, obviously. Stress, inequality, environmental issues, political dysfunction, and countless other challenges. But even poor people in developed countries today live vastly better lives than medieval nobility in most ways. You have access to food, medicine, information, and opportunities that kings could only dream of in the Middle Ages. Chapter 22. The exception, the wealthy. We should mention that not everyone in the Middle Ages suffers equally. If you're a member of the nobility or high clergy, your life is significantly better than a peasant's, though still terrible by modern standards. As a noble, you live in a castle or manor house. Your home is made of stone, not mud and sticks. It's larger and more comfortable. You have multiple rooms. You have furniture beyond a simple stool and table. You might even have glass windows, which is a luxury item. Your diet is better. You eat meat regularly. You have access to spices, which are expensive but make food taste better. You drink wine instead of ale. You're still probably malnourished by modern standards, but you're not starving. You have servants to do menial labor. You don't have to fetch your own water, cook your own food, or clean your own house. Other people do that for you. This gives you leisure time that peasants never have. You're educated, or at least literate. You can read and write. You have access to books, which are incredibly rare and valuable. You might speak multiple languages. You're part of an educated elite. You have political power. You make decisions that affect thousands of people. You're consulted by the king. You participate in governing. You matter in a way that peasants never do. But your life still isn't easy. You're expected to fight in wars. You're in constant political danger from rivals who might want to kill you and take your land. You're subject to the king's whims. You might be executed for treason or rebellion. Your children might be married off against their will for political alliances. You're still vulnerable to disease. The plague doesn't care if you're noble. You might have better medical care, but medieval medicine doesn't work regardless of who's administering it. You're probably going to die young by modern standards, just maybe not quite as young as a peasant. Your castle is cold, drafty, and uncomfortable. Stone buildings are hard to heat. You're cold most of the time in winter. Your castle probably doesn't have much in the way of sanitation. You might have a private latrine, but it's still basically a hole in the wall that drops into a cesspit below. Even as a noble, you're trapped in the rigid social structure. You have obligations to those above and below you. You can't just do whatever you want. Your life is constrained by duty, honor, and politics. So yes, being wealthy in the Middle Ages is better than being poor, but it's not good by modern standards. Everyone suffers, just to different degrees. You're still vulnerable to disease. The plague doesn't care if you're noble. You might have better medical care, but medieval medicine doesn't work, regardless of who's administering it. You're probably going to die young by modern standards, just maybe not quite as young as a peasant. Chapter 23. Why it lasted so long, you might be wondering. If life was so terrible, why did medieval society persist for nearly 1,000 years? Why didn't people rise up and change things? Several reasons. First, most people don't know that life could be better. They've never experienced anything else. This is just how life is. Their parents lived this way, their grandparents lived this way, and they assume their children will live this way. The idea of progress, of improving society over time, doesn't really exist. Second, The church tells people that their suffering is good for them. Your miserable life on earth is temporary. If you endure it with patience and faith, you'll be rewarded with eternal paradise in heaven. This life is just a test. Complaining about your lot or trying to change the social order is sinful. This ideology is incredibly powerful in keeping people complacent. Third, resistance is crushed brutally and visibly. When peasant revolts happen, they're put down with extreme violence. Leaders are executed in public, often tortured first as a warning to others. Entire villages that participated in revolts are burned. The message is clear: rebel and you'll be killed, and so will your family and everyone you know. Fourth, people are too busy surviving to organize resistance. You're working constantly just to have enough to eat. You're illiterate, so you can't communicate with people in other regions. You don't travel, so you don't know what's happening elsewhere. You're isolated in your small village, focused on your immediate survival. Fifth, there's no alternative model. Everyone in Europe lives under feudalism. It's not like you can point to some other society that's doing things differently and better. The only alternative most people can imagine is even worse chaos and violence. Sixth, change is incredibly slow in pre-modern societies. Technology advances at a glacial pace. Social structures are rigid and maintained by tradition and force. People do things the way they've always been done because that's what works, or at least what's familiar. It's only when several factors come together near the end of the Middle Ages that things start to change. The Black Death kills so many people that labor becomes valuable, giving surviving peasants more bargaining power. Trade increases, bringing new ideas and goods from other regions. The printing press is invented, making information more accessible. The Renaissance brings renewed interest in learning and innovation. The Protestant Reformation challenges the Catholic Church's monopoly on religious authority. All of these factors together finally start breaking down medieval society and leading to the early modern period. But it takes centuries, and the transition is violent and chaotic. The Middle Ages don't end neatly. They gradually transform into something else, and that transformation involves wars, persecutions, and enormous suffering. Chapter 24. Conclusion: Count your blessings. So there you have it. Life in the Middle Ages is an unrelenting nightmare of disease, hunger, violence, oppression, ignorance, and suffering. You're born into a world that doesn't care about you, where your life has minimal value, where you have no rights and no agency. You spend your entire life working just to survive. You're cold, hungry, dirty, and in pain most of the time. You watch your children die. You're beaten down by authority figures who see you as disposable. You're terrified of hell and demons and witches and 100 other supernatural threats. You're sick constantly, and there's nothing that can be done about it. If you're a woman, it's even worse. You're property. You have no control over your own body or your own life. You're subjected to repeated dangerous pregnancies. You're vulnerable to violence with no recourse. If you're a man, you're probably going to be conscripted to fight in a war you don't understand for reasons that don't benefit you. You might die slowly on a battlefield or survive and come home traumatized and broken. The Middle Ages represent roughly 1,000 years of human history where for most people, life was genuinely terrible. Yes, there were moments of beauty. Art was created. Music was composed. Stories were told. Love existed. Friendship existed. People found ways to be human and find meaning even in the worst circumstances. But let's be honest, the overwhelming experience of medieval life was suffering. This wasn't a romantic time of knights and castles and chivalry, at least not for 90% of the population. This was a time when life was, to quote Thomas Hobbes describing the state of nature, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. We romanticize the Middle Ages in movies and video games. We focus on the castles, the knights, the epic battles, the courtly love. And sure, those things existed, but they existed for a tiny elite. For everyone else, it was mud and shit and starvation and fear. The modern world has problems, serious problems: inequality, climate change, political polarization, mental health crises, and countless other issues that deserve our attention and action. But we live in a time of historically unprecedented prosperity, health, safety, and freedom. Your life expectancy is more than double what it was in the Middle Ages. You're not going to die of an infected cut. Your children are almost certainly going to survive to adulthood. You're not going to starve to death. You're not going to be burned at the stake for heresy or hanged for stealing bread. You have access to the sum total of human knowledge in your pocket. You can communicate instantaneously with people on the other side of the planet. You can travel safely to distant lands. You can choose your own path in life. You have rights that protect you from arbitrary authority. None of this existed in the Middle Ages. None of it. So the next time you're frustrated with modern life, the next time you think, man, things were simpler back in the day, remember what back in the day actually meant. Remember that your ancestors lived through hell so that you could live in relative comfort. The Middle Ages were not a better time. They were not a simpler time. They were a terrible time to be alive, and we should be grateful every single day that we weren't born then. Modern medicine, modern agriculture, modern sanitation, modern government, modern technology, all of these things have transformed human life in ways that would seem like literal magic to a medieval peasant. We live longer, healthier, more comfortable, more interesting lives than anyone in the Middle Ages could have possibly imagined. Yes, our world has problems. Yes, things could be better. Yes, we should work to improve society and address inequality and suffering wherever it exists. But let's have some perspective. Things are so much better now than they were for most of human history, and specifically, they're incomparably better than they were in the Middle Ages. Chapter 25. Final thoughts. No romanticism. Before we wrap up, I want to address something. Some of you might be thinking, but wait, weren't people happier back then because they didn't know any better? Isn't ignorance bliss? No, just no. Being ignorant of why you're suffering doesn't make the suffering hurt less. Not knowing about germ theory doesn't make your infected wound less painful. Not understanding that you're malnourished doesn't make hunger go away. Medieval people felt pain, fear, grief, and misery just as intensely as we do. And actually, medieval people weren't stupid. They were just as intelligent as we are. They observed the world around them and drew conclusions based on the information available to them. Many of their conclusions were wrong because they lacked scientific knowledge, but they were doing their best to understand and cope with a harsh world. They knew their lives were hard. They knew they were suffering. They didn't think this was some kind of paradise. Medieval literature is full of complaints about the hardships of life, prayers for relief, hopes for a better afterlife specifically because this life was so difficult. Some people also romanticize medieval community and social bonds. At least they had strong communities and everyone knew each other. Sure, everyone knew each other because you lived in a village of 100 people and never left. That enforced proximity isn't necessarily a good thing. You couldn't escape people you didn't like. You couldn't start fresh somewhere new. You were stuck with the same people forever, and if they decided they didn't like you, your life became even more miserable. Medieval communities could be supportive, yes, but they could also be oppressive, judgmental, and cruel. If you were different in any way, if you didn't conform to social norms, you were ostracized or worse. The tight-knit community that sounds so appealing was also a tool of social control. And let's address the "at least they didn't have social media" argument. Yes, social media has problems. But you know what medieval people had? Witch hunts, mob violence, public executions as entertainment, persecution of anyone who was different. Medieval social dynamics could be just as toxic as anything on Twitter, except with actual stakes like being burned alive. The grass is not greener in the past. It's dead because there was a drought and the crops failed and everyone starved. Another thing worth mentioning, the environmental impact. You might think, well, at least they weren't destroying the environment like we are. Actually, medieval agriculture was pretty destructive. Deforestation was widespread as forests were cleared for farmland and timber. Soil depletion was common because crop rotation was primitive. Medieval people used resources unsustainably. They just didn't have the technology to do it on the scale we do. Medieval people didn't live in harmony with nature. They were at the mercy of nature, which is completely different. They would have absolutely exploited natural resources more intensively if they could have. They just didn't have the technology. And finally, let's talk about the idea that people were more spiritual or meaningful in their lives back then. The Middle Ages were intensely religious, yes, but much of that religion was based on fear. Fear of hell, fear of damnation, fear of God's wrath. That's not spirituality, that's terror-based compliance. Genuine faith existed, of course. Many people found real comfort and meaning in their religious beliefs, but the church also used religion as a tool of control, and people didn't have the option of questioning or leaving. You were Christian, or you were persecuted. That's not authentic spirituality, that's coercion. Modern people can choose to be religious or not. We can explore different faiths. We can find meaning in secular philosophies. We have freedom that medieval people never had, and that freedom allows for more authentic spiritual exploration if that's what someone wants. The point I'm trying to make is this: there is no aspect of medieval life that was genuinely better than modern life for the average person. Not one. Every single thing we've discussed, from food to health to safety to freedom to comfort to knowledge to entertainment to lifespan, is dramatically better now. The medieval period is fascinating to study. It's important history. It shaped the world we live in today. But it was not a better time. And anyone who says they'd rather live then than now is engaging in fantasy, not reality. So be grateful. Be grateful for modern medicine that keeps you alive. Be grateful for modern agriculture that keeps you fed. Be grateful for modern infrastructure that keeps you safe and comfortable. Be grateful for modern education that gives you knowledge. Be grateful for modern government that gives you rights. Be grateful for modern technology that gives you opportunities. And then, use that gratitude as motivation to make the modern world even better. We've come so far from the Middle Ages, but we can still improve. We can still reduce suffering, increase freedom, expand knowledge, and make life better for everyone. But never ever think that the past was better. It wasn't, especially not the Middle Ages. All right, that's it. That's why it absolutely, completely, catastrophically sucks to be born in the Middle Ages. We've covered the disease, the filth, the hunger, the violence, the oppression, the ignorance, the fear, and the sheer unrelenting misery of medieval life. If you made it through this entire video, congratulations. You've just experienced a fraction of the suffering of medieval people, except you experienced it while sitting comfortably with access to food, medicine, and entertainment. So really you haven't experienced anything close to what they went through. If you learned something, if this gave you a new appreciation for modern life, or if you just enjoyed hearing about how terrible things used to be, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. I make videos about history, specifically about how much most of history sucked for most people, because I think it's important to maintain perspective. Check out my other videos where I cover other historical periods and explain why they were also terrible. Spoiler alert, pretty much all of history was terrible until very recently. Drop a comment below with what aspect of medieval life surprised you the most, or what you think I missed that makes the Middle Ages even worse than I described. Trust me, there's plenty I didn't have time to cover. Thanks for watching. Now go brush your teeth, take a hot shower, eat some fresh food from your refrigerator, and be grateful you live in the 21st century. I'll see you in the next video.